Come on in.
Jeremiah.
Hello. Come on.
Hello.
All right. We have Fred Mazzella, founder and CEO of BlaBlaCar, a French company.
Yes.
Welcome. We have Olivier Grémillon, the European and African Middle East director of Airbnb. And we have David Estrada, VP of Government Relations at Lyft, who joins me from San Francisco. Welcome, gentlemen. Before we start, I want to be really clear that we did invite other female founders to join the panel, but they were unable to make it. That's very important to us and LeWeb. So, gentlemen, quickly, tell us about your company in 140 words.
Okay, so BlaBlaCar connects drivers with empty seats, with passengers who are looking for the same way. And so it's basically on long distances, usually distances around 200 miles. So it's a very good way to link two cities which are a few hundred miles away. And usually people do travel for a fraction of the cost of the other means of transportation. Today, it's more than 10 million members in the community, and it's 2 million people traveling every month, which represents roughly more than what the Eurostar is transporting today. And the community is growing. We're in 13 countries now. We have offices in 8 countries.
And some stats. You have more riders than even Eurostar, is that my understanding?
Yeah, so like 2 million riders per month is more than what the Eurostar is transporting today. Well, it's just a way to see the amount of people traveling today with BlaBlaCar.
Stunning. Okay, Olivier, tell us about Airbnb.
So Airbnb is just an easy way and a safe way to book for more than over 1 million unique listings globally. So we have more than 25 million people who've used Airbnb over the past few years. Mm-hmm. We're in 190 countries, 34,000 cities, and I'm sure several of you are staying on Airbnb today. I've seen a few, so maybe show of hands, how many people staying on Airbnb while you're at LeWeb?
Okay, so about a third of the audience, so, yeah. Quite a few folks.
So yeah, developing pretty well in a lot of countries. We now have 15 offices globally. We're doubling down on Asia these days. So a lot of growth happening there, and a lot of good stuff happening. So.
And you just had a conference that I participated in. Yeah,
so that's the second time we actually do something we call the Airbnb Open, where we invited more than 1,000 hosts to come to San Francisco. And just share a few days with us, just to talk about product development, share their feedback, really be part of the Airbnb family. The idea came from something we called One Airbnb, which is an internal event we did last year when we invited the 800 employees to come to San Francisco, to spend some time together. And Brian Chesky and the other co-founders at some point say, why don't we do that with our extended family, which is our host community and our guest community? And that's how the concept of the Airbnb Open was created, and it happened a few days ago in San Francisco. And I'm happy to announce that the next one will be in Paris next year.
And is everybody invited?
If you're a host and you're a great host, yeah, sure, you can.
That's great. Hey, David, thanks for coming all the way up from SF. So tell us about Lyft. Some folks may not know about Lyft. It may not be in their country yet.
Yes, we're not here yet. We definitely are looking at international expansion. So Lyft is a San Francisco-based ride-sharing company. We were founded 2 years ago by Logan Green and John Zimmer. We have expanded in 2 years from one city, San Francisco, to 65 cities in the United States. We now do over 2 million rides per month, and we have over 100,000 drivers. It is a very easy way for you to use your own car to sign up on our service to provide rides to other people. And then the customers download the Lyft application, click a button to request a ride, and a ride shows up in minutes. Payment happens cashless on the system. We have great trust and safety mechanisms to create a very trusted community.
That's great. Let's do a poll to the audience. Let's see how many folks. How many of you have taken a BlaBlaCar ride? All right, I'd say about 20% of the audience, quite a few folks. And we already asked about Airbnb. Who's an Airbnb host? Okay, maybe 30, 40 people, that's about right. And how many people have taken a Lyft ride? Okay, a few, they must be from the US. And how many have heard of Lyft? Okay, just about everybody. That's great. Okay, gents, we saw the honeycomb. We looked at the growth in the last session. We saw the funding. Why is this happening now? Why is the movement exploding? David, why don't you kick things off?
I think for our space, what's very interesting and what our founders saw was that there's already been a revolution in the creation of infrastructure. So we have road infrastructure, we have bridges, we have buildings. And then came something new, the smartphone. And what the smartphone allowed people to do ultimately was to create new electronic infrastructure where we looked at the existing real-world infrastructure and said, how can this be used more efficiently? There are so many people out there who own a car that sits idle 80% of the time. And when you use it, it is almost always used for one person instead of more than one person. So our founders looked at that and said, we can create a new infrastructure, this application, which allows people to connect with one another and get much, much better usage out of your individual car.
Great. Why is this happening, guys?
Yeah, well, I'd say the same. Sometimes we just compare that to, like, if, for example, the 4T appeared in 1908, I'm pretty convinced that if internet and the smartphones had appeared in 1908, we would be ride-sharing since 1909. I mean, it's just because we are now able to share a resource which is very expensive to use that we do it. It's always been very expensive. Like if we take the example of cars, and I'm sure Olivier will add something on the houses, but regarding cars, it's always been very expensive actually to ride alone in his or her car. Like at the beginning, the car was made for 4 people, and so it was sold to families. And then after a while, it became like a tool for people to get around alone. But it was just because we had a very good product, which was the car, which we wanted to distribute to the maximum number of people. But it was not based on a rational usage of this car. And now we have the tools to know who is going where and when, and know if there are available seats for which the cost can be shared on the rides. And so it's very natural extension of the tools which we have today, and also the fact that we are able to synchronize that in real time.
When were you founded, your company?
I started in 2004.
Okay.
The first years, I think we were a bit early. It really took off in 2009, and then after that we...
it's interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Olivier. A lot of the startups emerged in 2008 at the trough of the recession. Why is that part of this movement?
Yeah, a lot of people very often ask us, is it something due to the recession, and after the recession ends, hopefully, your businesses are just going to die. I think some people think otherwise they wouldn't invest in Uber at a $40 billion valuation. But I think the recession definitely played a role in the growth that we've seen the past few years. It was a catalyst for these new services to emerge. But the other ones that you guys mentioned are very true. The technology aspect, now it's very easy through a cell phone, through a laptop, through a tablet to actually book, a means of transportation to book a house, a villa, an apartment, wherever you want in the world. The payment aspect is obviously key as well in all of our business. It's very easy when you go on Lyft. It's very easy as well when you use BlaBlaCar, and it's a way to secure the ride as well. In our case, it's as easy to book an apartment in the street next door that it is to book something on the other side of the world, because the payment is just the same. You pay in your own currency. So the technology aspect was definitely key in that. The economic aspect has been obviously key, because people want to make a little bit of money during these times of recession. And there's a societal aspect as well, which is people want more sustainability. People want more, link and relationship with people. And it's very true with BlaBlaCar, for instance. You're stuck with somebody for a few hours, so most likely you have to talk to somebody during this ride. So there are a lot of these different aspects that made all of that possible. I think BlaBlaCar, that's true, was maybe a little bit early, and that's why it took a little bit of time to catch up. In the early days, Airbnb didn't grow very well. When you look at the curve, it's pretty flat for quite some time. But I think that 2009, 2010 was really the development of all these models.
That's great. I'd also add to this as well. I mean, you talked about sustainability, but people want to generate revenue also from the assets they already have. And the one more I think that's very important is the human population curve, and I tweet and talk about that. When our parents were born, there were 2 billion people on this planet. When we were born, I think we're around the same age, there was 4 billion. Today, there's 7 billion. When we retire, gentlemen, I think you'll retire before I will, by the way, there will be 9 billion people, and then when we die, there's going to be 10 billion. So in 2 generations, 2 to 10 billion, I mean, do we really have a choice?
Well, for the one of you who came with a taxi or car or a LeCab or whatever, or this morning, you can see that it was a little bit painful because there are a lot of people on the streets. So can we have that many cars? Most likely not. Paris and London and all the big cities of the world have a finite space, and they cannot grow much more. So at some point, we have to use all these resources better in order to be able to continue to live all together. So.
Great. So let's talk about global for a second. Global growth. It's happening all around the world, and we see we're density. But this is also a city phenomenon, right? In inner city for you, and even local neighborhood. So as executives at your company, how do you manage this global plus local business strategy? That seems like a lot. How do you manage that? Go ahead.
Well, I'd say there are 2 components. It's a very complementary strategy that you have to apply. When you grow, you have to grow consistently and to be global and consistent, but also be very local. So in everything you do, whether it be community management, whether it be marketing, whether it be the product itself, you have to have a part which is generic, because otherwise you can't reach the economies of scale. And then you got to keep a part which will be adaptable to the local culture and the local aspects of the activity over there. If I take just a very simple thing for the brand, for example, going back to this topic of brand, because what we've been trying to build over the past months and years is really a brand that can expand everywhere, but has a local angle to it. So there are 2 things in it. Like in all the designs we do, we have a part which is generic, where we have blocks for the brand, and then each country can adapt those blocks, which are positioning blocks of the image of the service, of the attributes and the qualities of the product we are offering. And we also have, like in the name, we've chosen a name which is actually very international, which can be
what does your name mean, BlaBlaCar? What is that about?
Well, it comes from the fact that when you register with BlaBlaCar, you choose if you talk a lot, how chatty you are basically in the car. If you are blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so let's be honest. Which country has only 1 blah most usage? Be honest.
I can say about 3 blahs. Actually, we did this poll, and the most talkative people were the Polish ones.
The most chatty are the Polish people?
Yeah, the Polish people.
Okay.
Most blah, blah, blah.
Okay, and who's the quietest country in Europe?
To be honest, I don't know. We really looked at who was the most talkative.
You just don't want to say. It's probably some countries in the Nordics.
Maybe I'll check for you.
Okay. Good. Okay, thank you. So global and national. Now, you expanded into U.S. as well, right?
No.
You haven't yet?
No, we haven't.
Okay. But you just raised $100 million, I heard.
Yes.
So potential global expansion.
Yeah, potential. But for now, we're not looking at the US because from what we've seen, the parameters for long-distance ride-sharing in the US are not met yet. Just because gas is cheap. You may think otherwise, but gas is cheap in the US. The highways are almost all free, so there's not much to share. And then if you combine that with the fact that the GDP per inhabitant is higher in the US than it is in Europe, you get to a ratio where driving 1 mile in the US is 3 times less costly than driving 1 mile in Europe, which means that basically taking your car alone in the US is economically equivalent to driving with already 3 people in your car sharing the cost in Europe. So this is something that we think makes the development of ride-sharing in the US harder. And then you also have the distances, which are longer, and then the fact that the last mile is harder to do in the US cities than it is in Europe, because public transit is sometimes not.
And you'll have to add a feature. If you launch in US, you'll have to do 4 BLAs, because we talk a lot. Olivier, let's talk about global and local. So there was a report that came out from Airbnb that showed that a lot of the hosts are not in the city center where the traditional hotels are. How does that impact your strategy?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the development of Airbnb at the beginning. I think one difference between Airbnb and BlaBlaCar and Lyft is, in my mind, BlaBlaCar and Lyft are multi-local or multinational business, meaning that you are in different countries or different cities, but they are pretty siloed. While Airbnb is by definition global because people travel between countries. And so when our founders launched the companies, they did it in the US, obviously, targeting San Francisco and New York quite a bit. And then people started to use Airbnb outside of the US. Like when we launched the French operations 3 years ago, actually the soft launch was during LeWeb 3 years ago, there were already 4,000 listings in Paris, and we've not done anything for that. It's just French people who actually use Airbnb to go to some US cities who said, well, I just spent 2 weeks in the US and my house in the middle of Paris sits completely empty. I could have rented it out and make some money. We would have paid for my trip in the US. Why don't I do that? And some people started to do that in Paris, but all over the world. And that's why we are 190 countries right now, even if we have only 15 offices. So really, the first development was in the cities. It was basically Americans coming to Paris and then Europeans going to Chicago and New York, just to make it simple. And people realized that there are other places where people do travel. There are people who have houses and apartments and villas and boats and whatever outside of Paris and London and New York. And they started to put their place on Airbnb. And if you look at the French market, for instance, now more than 50% of our listings are outside of the big cities. So it's definitely developing beyond the cities. And people use it for a lot of different reasons, whether it's for a weekend break in a big city, or for a 2-week vacation in Sardinia, or for business. Some people use Airbnb when they travel on business, like a lot of you guys today.
That's great. Let's talk about Lyft. It's in US only right now, but I'm sure will eventually globally expand. What kind of patterns do you see in different neighborhoods?
Well, what we see is that our service is very hyper-local. And going abroad is, of course, part of the future. But what we're doing is we're learning what cities does it work well in and what cities does it not work well in. And there are a lot of characteristics you need to look at. San Francisco, for example, is an ideal market. It's 7 square miles. It's a very densely populated, very small area. Parking is very, very hard to come by and very expensive. Many people don't have parking garages. And people are very social. And some people are looking for part-time work. It's the absolute ideal market. If we look at some others, for instance, Houston. Houston is America's 3rd largest city. Millions of people there, but it's a very tough market for what we're offering. People travel long distances. Car ownership is very much a part of life. The highways are very wide. They have plenty of space. There's more parking than they know what to do with. And gas is fairly inexpensive in that part of the country. Now, Paris is a particular market. London is a particular market. So for us, launching, it's much, much different than launching a typical internet platform. Google can launch a service all over the world just by internationalizing the languages, making a few tweaks. If the service is good, people will start to use it everywhere. If we want to launch in Paris, we need to do a lot of work understanding Paris. We need to do a lot of work making sure we have enough drivers to satisfy demand. Because in most places, you could walk outside of your hotel room and there's a taxi. Why would you wait 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes for a Lyft car instead of taking the taxi there? So we spend a lot of time understanding the market. We spend a lot of time getting enough drivers before we launch. And then finally, there's the regulatory aspect, which is a huge aspect, which I know we'll talk about later.
Right. The Lyft brand also, to that local aspect, is known as being very friendly. And it actually sets you apart from some of your competitors.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so when Lyft started, it was the first, and it was before the competitors, to actually have you use your own vehicle, which is not a licensed commercial vehicle. You are not a licensed commercial driver. And we asked you to, hey, sign up to this service. We'll do a background check on you. We'll check your vehicle history, your driver history, make sure you're safe. And you make yourself available to give people rides. We thought that in order to do that successfully, people had to have a certain comfort level, and we encouraged people to sit in the front seat instead of the back. Treat this as your friend with a car, as opposed to a driver who you don't talk to typically in a taxi-type situation. We encourage you to give a fist bump, which was in order to break the ice, and they put this big, giant, funny-looking pink mustache on the car, again, to break the ice. It was really trying to do something which at the time, only 2 years ago, was brand new, which was this idea that you're going to get into this closed space with another person you haven't met before and actually have a conversation. Much, much different than the notion of call a cab and just hop in the back.
That's great. Gents, let's talk about what the questions that's on everybody's mind. And we'll take questions from the audience in just a few minutes. But let's talk about the criticisms of this space. And we have to do it justice. I have some of the leading execs from the top in the space. There are concerns about hubris and ego in this market. There's concerns about a winner-takes-all attitude, privacy, safety. These are all issues that we're wrestling with. We'll talk about government in a sec, but let's just deal with the relationship with society. Gentlemen, how are we going to make sure this works? And let's just talk about safety, for example. A woman was apparently hurt in India. It's a very horrible thing. It was a rape in a competitor's thing this week. And it's upsetting for everybody. How do we ensure there's safety in all the things that we're doing? Go ahead, jump all at once to answer that.
I can start. I think the amazing thing is how few things happen. Honestly, even internally, when we look at the number of cases where whether something is broken in an apartment, somebody gets injured for whatever reason or whatever, it's very small. We launched, a couple of years ago, a host guarantee. So basically, when something happens in your home, Airbnb would reimburse you if something gets broken. We did that with a $50,000 guarantee at the beginning. Everybody thought we were crazy because we were not as well funded as we were today. It was on our own money, and people thought that Airbnb would go bankrupt because of that. Well, it happened that we increased it to $1 million pretty recently last year because, not that many things happen, actually. And we just launched a liability insurance protection in the US for the same reason, because it doesn't cost a lot of money to offer this service because there are not that many things happening. So there are a lot of things that are put in place to ensure safety and the fact that people have a good experience when they use one of our services. Obviously, there is checking the profiles of people, making sure that you build your reputation online by having a picture of yourself, by having verifications of your identity, online, offline, a lot of things
Facebook
to make
Connect,
sure.
LinkedIn Connect.
Facebook Connect, you put your LinkedIn, your Twitter account. We might ask in some cases a copy of your offline ID as well, your passport, your driving license, whatever. So there's a lot of work that is done up front. The great thing with our services is as the payment goes through us, we have a way to gather reviews on both sides of the marketplace, on the host and the guest, on the driver and the passenger, which helps have some valid reviews. It's not fake reviews that everybody can put on the website. It's linked to the payment, so we know when somebody has stayed in an Airbnb apartment, and these are legit. And then when something does happen, we're here for people. We have among us customer support operations with a dedicated trust and safety team, and when something happens, we're here for our guests and hosts.
David and Fred, there's a lot of concerns about your particular space, transportation, about the information that you have. You know where people are going. You know their ID. A taxi is somewhat anonymous. Tell us how you're going to solve that, enabling privacy for your own customers and drivers.
Well, maybe the first thing is that for the privacy, you just don't use the data at all. You may use it for like doing some analytics and like being totally anonymously treated, but you absolutely don't use it for anything else. So I think it relates to a topic you'll be talking about just right after, which is about the culture. But I think the culture of the company and the culture of the service itself is very important to ensure that in the long term, the entire team who's building the service is making things right. I think this is of the higher importance.
Go ahead, talk about that, the culture that you're instilling in your company.
About the culture, well, the way we did it, because when you have a company which grows like about like the size of the pool of people in the company doubles every year, and so if you want to keep the culture that you've been building since the very beginning, at some point I think you've got to write it. So what we did a year and a half ago, we were 60, now today we're 200 people. When we were 60, we gathered in a room all together and we said, okay, what values do we have? What makes it so special to work at BlaBlaCar? What motivates us? Why do we have these ambitions? What are the qualities that we require for each one of us? And how do we make sure that the new people who will be joining our team also have this same spirit and same culture? So we made this thinking, and then we came up with a set of 10 values, which we self-define ourselves. Actually, I always carry them with me. I can show you. I have them here. Like
you always carry that with you?
Yeah.
Not just here because we're on stage?
No. I have some others here. I mean, I have them everywhere. And we actually stick them on our computers. I think you have to write them. Oh, yeah, I can go through them. We're passionate, we innovate. Mm-hmm. They're like fail, learn, succeed.
Hold it up so the cameras can zoom in. Which one talks about your ethics?
Never assume, always check. Right? In trust, we trust, which is what we're building. We're building trust between people. We're building trust between the people and our service. We have share more and more as well. I mean, I can go through all of them, but this is what defines us today, and this is how we grow forward, and this is how we make sure that we innovate together, we do things right, we are still very passionate about what we do, and we know that in order to become a service that can be used by everybody, it has to be as close to perfection as it can. So Great. This is what drives us.
I'm sorry he showed you guys up with his value cards. But David, tell us about how do you maintain privacy? You have a lot of information about where people are going.
Yeah, what's so important about these kinds of companies is trust and safety is at the heart of all of them, because we are offering platforms for people to come together. And once you create something that does not allow the level of trust and safety that you expect, you lose your users. It's an incredibly competitive marketplace with very low barriers to entry, and there is a lot of venture capital interest ready to start a new company to take your company out when your company stumbles. So that's the landscape. And so, one, you have to provide users with trust and safety or they will leave. Now then the question is, who are your founders and what are their values? So at our company, our founders have deep, deep respect for people and for community and doing the right thing. And privacy has always been an important objective of ours. So we do know the origin and destination of every ride where everyone goes on. To respect our community, we need to put very, very tight controls over who at our company can access that information. We actually have multiple levels of access, and we restrict it very, very seriously to those people who need to know the information.
Speaking of values, when I met with your founder, John Zimmer, he told me his passion was really in sustainability, ride sharing, and it brought him to this company.
Yeah. What John is really interested in doing is getting more and more cars off of the road and changing car ownership into shared rides. And we can talk more about that. The basic idea is along the lines you talked about with population growth. Ultimately, you cannot have more cars on the road. There were some folks talking about the difficulty of getting in a taxi cab and trying to get here today, and it took an hour. And most of the cars that are on the road have one single person in them, and then when they get to their destination, they can't find a place to park. If we change that and make it very, very easy for you to become a driver, our vision is everyone should be a Lyft driver. And when you're going anywhere, you should be willing to share a ride. You need to know that it's going to be trusted, that you're going to get into a car with somebody that you can have a shared, trusted relationship with. But if you choose to own a car because it works for you and you have parking, you should be able to drive many of the other people who choose not to own a car.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about working with governments, both city and country level. Apparently, Brussels has banned one of the ride-sharing companies, apparently yesterday, and India as well, just all within 1 week. And there's been times when Airbnb is deemed, quote-unquote, illegal by different cities. Gentlemen, what messages do you have? Oh, and the EU did a whole post about ride-sharing after the protests from taxi drivers. Gentlemen, what messages do you have to government leaders?
Well, on our side, maybe there's one thing which is very important inside the BlaBlaCar service. It's really the first thing to remark is that our drivers are really sharing costs. They're not making any profits, so they're just...
They're not making profits.
They're not making any profit. They are not making profit. And so, which means they simply share the cost, which means that it's just like if they were sharing the cost with friends or family members. It's nothing to do with a professional service that could be offered for transportation, so it does not compete with existing services because our drivers are not professional. Our drivers are people like you and me who have seats in their cars available and who offer them to passengers to share the cost. And so the first thing is really to go back to what sharing means, and for us it's really the community is not making any profit at all. It's really sharing assets which would be used otherwise anyway. And so for the regulations, it makes things much, much, much easier because in this case, it's not competing with existing transportation models.
Although governments invested billions of euros into Eurostar, and now you're doing what they offer on an app.
Well, the thing is, it's a panel of possibilities that is allowed by the new technologies. And so times are changing. And so if we go back to maybe the reactions that governments may have, it's simply because when things are moving, there are changes. And when there are changes, of course, there are people and interests which are opposed to the fact that things are really evolving. So it takes time. It may take years, another few years, but I think that in the end, maybe innovation is going faster than the mentalities, and so we are getting used to the fact that now we have resources which can be shared among normal people, and we'll get used to that because now we have the ways to do it, as we said, with the smartphones, with internet, with the connectivity. We have new ways of living together, and so this is a whole transformation. This is what's all about with the sharing economy, is that it's a new way of interacting with each other. And I think our children will be like very used to that, but we are a bit, maybe we're too old and we think it's so brand new and phenomenal, but I think for the next generation it's just normal.
Mm-hmm. Governments.
Yeah, I agree with Fred. I think when we look back at this period, like 10 years from now, it will be a very short period of time when the press was talking about government relation issues for some of our businesses. Like it takes time because we are a new phenomenon. If you look at the kind of thing we do, there are no laws in most cases to actually regulate it. Most of the laws that regulate our business have been drafted 50 years ago, and obviously internet didn't exist at that time. A lot of things didn't exist at that time. So it's normal that there is some reaction to new phenomena like the one we are working on. But I think we are past the time where government officials were, oh, it's illegal, we need to do something about it. I think we are past that. The first time I met with a government official in Europe a few years ago, the person told me, your worst enemy is ignorance. And what he meant by that is people have preconceptions about what you do that are not correct. So explain what you do, explain in what it's actually a good thing for people, explain in how it's going to remove some cars from the streets, explain how more people can come to visit wonderful cities and stuff, and it will work fine. It was 2 or 3 years ago, and I think we are past this time now where in most places where people understand that there is value. In some cases, it needs to be regulated, and we are, in our case, much in favor of regulation in some cases because we need a fair regulation and we need something clear. In many cases, it's not clear. So, it's normal that it creates some debate, but it's a healthy debate. And as I'm going to conferences these days and I'm always asked about government relations, I brought you a quote that was mentioned a couple of days ago by the UK Minister of Business. So let me read it for you, and I think it summarizes pretty well what the situation is. So Minister for Business, Enterprise and Energy saying, where other countries and cities are closing down consumer choice and limiting people's freedom to make better use of their possessions, we are embracing it. Basically what he says is the UK is embracing the sharing economy while others are still, lagging behind a little bit. It's just a matter of time.
So it's good for people. Who has a question? Raise hands, and we'll have the mic come to you. But David, this is your line of work, government affairs. What message do you have to governments?
Well, you're right. So what I do every day is work with governments, and the difficulty is they don't have a framework for what we do. And typically when we go to launch in a city, we work with government, we try to build good relationships, and the first thing they say is, our framework is we regulate taxis. And they have a certain way of doing that. And what they're trying to do in their minds is create safety. So what they do is they say, here are our taxi safety regulations that we've had around for 50 or so years. Let's have you guys follow the same safety regulations. And the difficulty in the conversation and the conversion of the mindset is to say, while you have regulated the taxi industry in a certain way for the past 50 years, it's possible now that we can create the same levels of trust and safety with no expense to the government without any regulations whatsoever. So for instance, you may have required fingerprint-based background checks, and you may have required, say, a driver geography test for the city, which the UK, England famously has in London. Well, now we are able to do background checks electronically, and we take on all of the cost. People use navigation apps to get around. It just so happens that in most cities, you probably shouldn't have to take a geography test to get around. In some cities, maybe you should. But the difficult conversations, and we are making headway, is government, let us take on some of the burden. Let us create the trust and safety that you usually created forever, and let individuals deal with one another directly without the government always being the intermediary.
Okay. We're going to go to questions. I'd love to hear your name, and then what is your question, sir?
Good morning. My name is Camilo. I'm working for the Agence Numérique of the government in Belgium. So I want just to come back on the notion of cities which are banning your services. I don't know if you know, but in Belgium, it took us years, but we finally managed this to enable what we call the carpooling, so which means sharing a car to go to your office. And it has been up to the level where today we have financial incentive coming from the government to the user of the car, or coming from the government to the enterprise, which suggests that to their employees. So what could be the argument, my question is different, what could be the argument you can give me to tell them that it's more or less the same kind of story and the same kind of, let's say, value that we can bring to the society in order to enable them to avoid cities banning your services?
This sounds like you.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's one story I like, which is in the 1860s. There was the Red Flag Act. I don't know if you've ever heard of this act. It was when the cars just appeared. And before that, there were cars with no engine. And so at the time, there was a lobby, of course, of the horses cars, being scared about the fact that the new cars with engines were going faster. And so the Red Flag Act was stating that a car couldn't go more than 6 miles per hour on the roads, and you had to have someone walking in front of the car to say to everybody, be careful, there is an engine coming with the car. And then, so after, it took almost a decade to get rid of this act. And I think it's when we have changes like this, and when we look back at the things we've done, we've been able to publish this kind of law, that we realize that when there is a change, there is always some regulations which try to control things, and it's good because we need regulations, but sometimes we've got to look a bit further ahead.
Okay, great. Another question. Number 5 back up there. Hello.
Hello, hi, I'm Maite. I'm from Belgium as well. Hey, Carmelo. And I'm working in the health sector in an application, and so it's community as well. And you talk about community, about being global, and my question is, what do you think about standards, and when do you think standards are going to get global? How many years, or are we talking about decades, you think?
What kind of standards? That can mean many types.
You know, global standards like in healthcare or in IT or whatever. For the moment, you have governments coding in this standards, and then that companies using that, et cetera, et cetera. We're going global. When are those standards going to go global, you think?
Okay, so I want to thank you. That's a great question. So let's talk about reputation standards. Do 5 stars in Lyft mean 5 stars in Airbnb? What about data standards or sharing or even APIs, which are bound to be launched? Are you guys having these discussions right now?
Well, you know, on the reputation side, right now we all have a reputation system that we build, you know, a little bit in silo. At some point, it might make sense to actually share all of them together, because if you are a power seller on eBay, a super host on Airbnb, and a great driver on BlaBlaCar, you know, maybe you should actually be able to use the reputation on one platform to go to the others. One thing that is pretty interesting, a few months ago, a friend of mine who works at a very reputable bank sent me an email and says, look at this resume. The resume, you know, the person was pretty junior, had a couple of internships out of school, and at the bottom he had a pretty lengthy paragraph on his Airbnb hosting experience, and he put that on his resume because, you know, and he linked his own profile on the resume so that people could check him out. And the rationale was, if I'm a great host and I've hosted, you know, 20, 30, 40 people, whatever, and I got 5-star every single time, and I'm a nice person, it has a value to a recruiter. So there is definitely a way where people can use the reputation that is being built on one platform in others. So there should be a standard at some point where people can share some of that, definitely.
You know, gentlemen, we saw this in the first phase, the internet, right? W3C, and there was standards and consortium. Then we saw in the next phase, social media, the launch of APIs, Facebook Quick Connect, Twitter Connect. But the standard did not take in the social media landscape. There was no reason for Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and MySpace, who launched it well, to connect. So I'm sure that conversation happened in 2007. But what do you guys think? Can we have standards and APIs that connect?
Just to build on that, I think the very big difference is when you're on social media, you talk to people virtually. When you are in one of our business, it's something that happens in the real life. So the trust is definitely a very big aspect of this. And that's why the standards and the reputation you can build is actually much more important than you can be on social media, I would say.
I think there's people looking at whether we can build something similar to an online credit score. You know, in the US, when you go to buy a home, and probably everywhere, there are these credit reporting agencies, and they look at your credit history, and they give you a score, and the bank uses that to say, yes, this person is a worthy credit risk. Mm-hmm. I think by the same token, there are those independent companies that would like to look across all social media sites, all online sites, on my performance, on my reputation, and then create a score. Now, the great benefit to that would be new services that start up don't have to start from scratch. I, as a user, can join, and instantly I have a score, and I take it with me everywhere. Great benefit for new services, because when we're all balkanized, we have different scoring systems. Airbnb can rise and become very, very important. And it has a lot of value in all of the ratings that have been developed from all of its users. If a competitor comes along, they have to build that from scratch. And that's one of the barriers to entry,
Right.
the fact that we all have these very individualized scoring systems.
Right, and there's already 3 startups that are trying to do that centralized reputation. There's Trady, and I know they're here today, Rep, and then TrustCloud, and many others are coming around. So it's bound to happen. It's whether or not it's in your best interest, like the car sharing players, for you to open that up and let your opponents take that data. It could be a major risk. Or to Airbnb, you could let an upstart get that reputation data, could compete with you directly. So I think that's something that will unfold, and we'll talk about it next year at LeWeb. Let's go to another question, and then I want to come back to predictions. And so where are the questions? Over here. And LeWeb team, if we could put the honeycomb graphic up, the big one, that'll be used in our last question for the panel. Hello. Are you from Belgium too?
No,
Okay,
I'm from
good.
Korea actually.
Okay.
Okay, I came far from here, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask questions. As I'm also one of the entrepreneurs who want to start sharing economy business in social delivery service. But what I'm asking is, how can we deal with the law? I think most sharing economy companies are not illegal, but also it's not legal too. So it is just not covered by the law actually. Maybe it's related to the government issue too, but if I was in US, maybe I can lobby some congressman, or if I can have another chance to do it. But as I'm doing the social delivery service, like using empty space in your baggage, so when you go abroad, you can deliver other people's product by using their empty space, so you can travel less, expensively. So everyone is asking me about the law, about the customs, and about the safety. So how do you guys really deal with the law problem? Thank you.
Help a budding entrepreneur. Thank you.
Well, can I begin? So I think that, well, sooner or later, we realize that anyway, it is the role of the law to be behind the innovations. They have so much to do already with what's existing that if the people who are making the laws were anticipating and saying, okay, we need to regulate this because in 2018 something might happen, it will never happen. So when you innovate, there is a zone for a few months, years, where you actually innovate and what you are doing hasn't been forecasted by the people who do the law, and this is normal. And then when you innovate, I think you should go towards making something that makes sense. You should go back to your instinct and common sense. If you are building something which has value for people, and in the end, which makes good, and you really believe that it will help the world later on, at some point, common sense will come back massively, and then everybody will just agree that this makes sense and we should do it. But in the meantime, there may be some troubles where people don't really understand where you're going. That's what we were talking about, doing things right. I think if you make a service that makes sense, that optimize resources, because often when we're talking about sharing economy, we're talking about sharing resources and optimizing things. If you go towards optimization, the fact that our resources and the fact that we will be 10 billion on this planet, we don't even know if this planet can hold it. If you go towards optimizing resources, common sense, building a service that has quality and trust in it, even if the law is not ready yet, I think common sense will come back, and you should be fine in a few years from now.
Thank you. Let's go to the final question. And LeWeb team, if we could pull up the honeycomb graphic from my slides, that would be fantastic. Gentlemen, make a prediction. Where are we going to see the most growth in this new collaborative crowd sharing economy? Which hex? And you can't say the hex that you're in, so not transportation or space from you. Who would like to start with their prediction?
Yeah, I'll start. One that I'm really interested in, actually, is shared office space. I think it's one that has the slowest start, but it has enormous potential. When you look at all these giant buildings out there that get dramatically underutilized, and one thing that companies have to deal with and figure out is how do they handle confidentiality issues? because I might have 2 floors that are empty and they might be empty for the next 2 years, but I feel like if another company is going to come in and use that space, I have some internal privacy issues and confidentiality. In San Francisco, there is so much shared space being used by tech startups, and people have just kind of lost their fear of being in the same place and developing very, very different products, sometimes competitive products, where I could walk over to a few desks and start recruiting the workers from another company. But a sense of trust and community has developed that you just don't do that. So I think we can get a lot of utilization out of office space in the future.
Okay, office space. Olivier.
Well, to come back to the earlier question you asked about what are the drivers, I think if you take what are the main drivers for the growth of our business, it applies to a lot of the categories you have up there. So technology is something that exists now and everybody can build. It's pretty easy to build an app. It's pretty easy to build a website. So it's out there. The payment systems exist. There are a lot of things that exist. If you look at the 2 other factors, you need to be at the right time in terms of jumping on a societal driver wagon. If sustainability is something big right now, it's something you can jump on. And then the last one is around economic activity. I think the reason why our businesses do work is because the ticket item is actually pretty high, and people can actually save quite a bit of money by doing some of the stuff they do on our website. Instead of taking a train, they go on BlaBlaCar. Instead of using normal accommodation, they use Airbnb for longer times. So I think the economic aspect is actually not trivial. So if you look at some of the stuff you have up there, education is very expensive in most of the places globally. Healthcare is very expensive. So there are a lot of different, big ticket items that cost a lot of money to people today that could be somehow disrupted by some sharing economy or crowd companies.
So learning and
business.
healthcare. Okay, what do you think?
I'd go for education because, like, if we look at the kind of resources that we share in the sharing economy, they are like your properties, the cars, the houses. They're like, and then you look at what are the most valuable things that you own, that you have. You have your properties, you have your money, your knowledge, and your time. And all those things are the most valuable things you have in life. And so anything that will come to optimize this, either your time or your knowledge. So if we go for education, and both my parents are teachers, they've been teachers of their lives. And then when I look at what they've done, I mean, I admire them because they've been teaching for 40 years, mostly almost the same classes, which is incredible. I mean, they spend like so many times repeating things just to teach the new kids of the next generation that now with the tools we have the opportunity to make knowledge much broader in a much smarter and faster way. And then the role of education is, of course, knowledge, but it's also motivation to learn. So then the school will need to be there to learn to people how to learn, and then to make sure that people behave socially correctly. Those are the 3 roles of school today, and I think one of the roles which will get improved a lot is on the knowledge, because of course now with all the MOOCs we have, we can go much faster with knowledge.
Please thank our panelists, the crowd economy. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.